Now that we're a month into the league, I'm going to indulge myself in one of my favorite pastimes, taking a look around PoENinja to see what the meta is and what cool builds people might be overlooking. Like with many other videos that are similar to this, I'm going to add the usual disclaimers. This isn't me talking about a build that I've played for hundreds of hours on, where I'm extremely knowledgeable or can point to exact things. Instead, I'm going to be guessing at what a build might be doing and why people might be doing things. Also, and this is especially important in 3.19, there's a lot more builds which are playable than what you see on PoENinja. PoENinja is the top players by experience, so in that regard, it's a little bit inaccurate. However, it's the best metric that we have, so I'm going to look at it because I've found some really awesome builds this way in the past. Now, going back a little bit, 3.18 had a very similar meta to 3.17 and 3.16. There was a huge shakeup in 3.15, and then a pretty big shakeup in 3.16. But not much changed after that. And a lot of the changes in the 3.19 patch notes, specifically those regarding builds, were about fostering build diversity. The changes weren't extreme, rather it was a nudge in the right direction, not a push or a shove. So my hope is that the meta would be shaken up as a result. But did it work? Well, 1 month into 3.18, the meta was as follows. Righteous Fire was the most played build at 15%. Lightning Strike was the second most played build at 11%. It should be noted, both of these builds did get nerfed. Then you had Cast on Crit Strike at 7%, mixed in with some actual Cyclone players, but actual Cyclone players aren't real, and if you want to prove me wrong, leave a comment down below if you're playing actual Cyclone. Next we had Summon Skeletons at 5%, which was also nerfed, and Spark at 5%, which was, if anything, buffed if not left alone. Looking at 3.19, 1 month in, we have Lightning Strike at 11%, Righteous Fire at 10%. The nerf to Lightning Strike was honestly much more of a perceived nerf than an actual nerf. Not that many people were triple hitting by abusing the bug, so it being fixed doesn't change all that much. Righteous Fire saw an actual nerf, which is probably part of why it's now below Lightning Strike, but it's still a very good build. Cast on Crit Strike is at 6%, and again, there are no actual Cyclone players there. Spark is at 5%, same play rate as before. And now we have Lightning Conduit, a completely new skill added in 3.19, which is at 4%. And it's really cool to see new skills like Lightning Conduit getting a significant play rate. I know that Lightning Conduit is definitely on my list of skills to play. So a lot of the top builds do remain the same, but one very interesting change took place here. Previously, the top 5 builds made up 43% of all builds listed on PoENinja 1 month in. Now in 3.19, the top builds are only 36%. So the meta is definitely more diverse than it was before, even if we're only looking at the top builds as shown on PoENinja. Sure, Righteous Fire and Lightning Strike are still up near the top, and a ton of people like playing Cast on Crit. There's even Spark still holding on to number 4. But overall, this is a good change as it shows that what GGG did does foster more build diversity. Think of it this way. If everyone not playing one of the top 5 builds in 3.19 were all playing the same build, it would be ranked 3 on the list, above Cast on Crit Strike, and just below Righteous Fire. Something else to note is the amount of people playing a specific build isn't necessarily indicative of a build's power. You have things like Scourge Arrow Pathfinder, which I'm playing right now, which is an incredibly powerful build, but very underrepresented. If you want to know more about the build itself and how it works, then get subscribed as I'm going to be talking about it in a future video. Other builds can be overrepresented because it's everyone's go-to recommendation. This was often seen with Seismic Trap, where the build was good at certain things, but it got kind of over-recommended even for content that it didn't excel at, such as Simulacrum or Blighted maps. And then new skills are always a big gamble. Sometimes they're super well represented, and sometimes they're very poorly represented. In this case, Lightning Conduit has been well represented, and personally that makes me happy. But next up, I'm going to get into some interesting or underrated build ideas. Things that have either been around for a while and not that many people are playing, and there's not that much attention on, or things that I just find cool even if there's a decent bit known about them. Before I get into that though, a quick reminder that if you found this look at the meta for Path of Exile 3.19 to be interesting, do leave a like and share the video with a friend. If you want to see more information about the 3.19 meta, such as a solo self-found hardcore or solo self-found hardcore meta analysis, then let me know down in the comments below. For more content, you can check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, where I recently went over the Grand Theft Auto 6 leak and other gaming news. Link will be in the card and the description below. Before I get back to things, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for making videos like this one possible. More about how you can support at the end. For now, let's head over to PoENinja and look at 3 cool build ideas. First off, we have Hand of Wisdom in Action, or HOWA Flicker. The reason I wanted to highlight this build in particular is it got a lot of buffs from the Lake system in 3.19. The Lake lets you mirror an item, causing the modifiers to double in magnitude and go negative or positive. Now, normally, if your lightning res went negative, that would be a problem. But if you're using Doryani's prototype, that is in fact a buff. So, as you can see here, we've got a regular amulet with a massive amount of int. You only get this if it's a mirrored lake amulet. There's no way to normally roll 120 int on an amulet. And we have a ring here with minus 67 to lightning res. The big reason that Doryani's HOWA Flicker rose to prominence somewhat in 3.16 was because of Scourge. Much like the Lake, Scourge had an upside and a downside, and the downside could be negative resists. And we can see on the other ring an absolutely massive ton of int, massive ton of ES, and minus 116% lightning res. So with just 2 rings, this player is pretty much at the negative 200% lightning res cap for Doryani's, especially factoring in the fact that you probably have about negative 60% res since you don't want to build lightning res if you're playing Doryani's. The big advantage of this build is it is way tankier than a normal Flicker Strike character. Normal Flicker Strike character, a boss looks at you and you fall over. But this version is CI, so you don't have to worry about any of that pesky chaos damage. Plus, you're using Aegis Aurora, which is the ultimate block shield. It will mean that you have to scale your block a bit, but once you do, the recovery that you get is absurd, and you'll be able to tank most boss mechanics in the game. If you can stomach the playstyle Flicker, this is of course an insanely strong build, and it's far more accessible than it's been in previous leagues. We get all of our damage from the Hand of Wisdom in Action, and then a lot of extra ES from Shaper's Touch. I think one of the most expensive parts is in fact the Aegis, but it is absolutely worth the cost. The rest of the damage of course comes from Doryani's prototype. Something else that's pretty cool and new to this league is you don't have to just play it on a raider anymore. If you're truly insane and have the budget to keep it up, specifically keep your frenzies up that is, I know you're probably thinking of something else, but this is not that kind of channel. Well, if you can keep your frenzies up, you can play a trickster version, and this version is absolutely insane. And I would guess that this build makes short work of uber bosses. Now, are their frenzy charges actually going to be fully sustained? They have 9 of them, so probably. I don't 100% know, I'd have to play the build or see it in action. Just from looking over things though, there is a very good chance that yes, all of the frenzy charges will be easily sustained here, and they will have absolutely no issues completely destroying stuff. And if you're wondering how tanky is this build, well, 250,000 armor. 250,000 armor with this much ES is enough that you can comfortably tank an Uber Shaper Slam and just shrug it off as if nothing happened. In terms of resistances, it looks like they're not using Melting of the Flesh, but they do have Aegis, so we're looking at 75, 80, 80. Elemental damage might be a slight weakness. I think that having the Sapphire Flask and Ruby Flask does significantly make up for it. And again, with 250,000 armor, you're definitely not going to die to lightning hits. All you will have to worry about is lightning damage over time effects. Mana Siphoner would be a big concern. Luckily, since you're playing Flicker Strike, you instantly teleport on top of a Mana Siphoner, and, well, at 33 million DPS, you probably one-shot it. There are a few other lightning dots in the game, but most of them can be avoided with good gameplay. So, overall, this is a really cool build, and it's super strong, especially if you want something towards the high end of builds. Of course, Flicker won't be for everyone, so your mileage will vary. Next up, we have Summon Raging Spirits, which comes in multiple flavors. This, for example, is the popcorn flavored one, where you want to get a bunch of minion health, you have your skulls fly towards the enemy, and then explode. Personally, I'm not sure I'd want to play the popcorn variant. I think at that point I just want to play Death Wish and blow golems up. However, that isn't to say it isn't a good build. This is more to demonstrate the fact that there's multiple ways to play certain skills, as opposed to a specific endorsement of this variation, though again, I'm sure it's fine. It's just not really my cup of tea. On the other hand, something that is a little bit more my cup of tea would be something like this. A more traditional Summon Raging Spirit Necromancer. Now, there have been a lot of changes to minions in 3.19, and one of the biggest changes is you can now get minion modifiers on rings and shields. As you can see, minions have attack and cast speed. This is very good if you want your skulls to go hit things real fast. You can get minion skill gems on a shield, so you don't have to use dual wands if you want damage. And overall, this has brought a lot of quality of life to certain minion builds. I think SRS is one of the big winners. It's a base Fizz skill, it scales quite well off of gem level. And because they're temporary minions, you don't really have to worry about keeping them alive. You can just summon more with Unleash support. Additionally, because they are base Fizz, you can use the new Necromancer Ascendancy node to get permanent uptime on Unholy Might. 30% of Fizz is extra chaos. I haven't looked at damage breakdowns for quite how much this is. I expect because you're not penetrating resistances that it's not 30% more damage, but it will be a significant boost since SRS already has very high base Fizz damage, which then gets converted over to fire. Because it's converted to fire, you can do a lot of res shred shenanigans. You can put things like a fire exposure on your gloves and deal with enemy fire res that way. There's also some really cool stuff that you can explore if instead you wanted to do a non-Necromancer Ascendancy for SRS. Non-Necromancer summoners have been buffed quite a bit, with Guardians coming away as overall the big winner. Here we have one using Fleshcrafter. The nice thing about Fleshcrafter is you don't have to worry about those pesky enemy resistances anymore. When minions have Energy Shield, their hits ignore monster elemental resistances, since SRS does pure elemental damage by default, and since you summon a lot of them to enable Onslaught, they will be super fast zoomy skulls that hit very hard and do a lot of damage. One particular cool tech I like in this build is the Quickening Covenant. Notables in Radius are transformed to give enemies reduced movement speed, so you don't really want notables, you don't want your minions to go slower, but as long as you avoid those notables, they have attack speed, cast speed, and suppression. The suppression probably doesn't matter that much. You won't really struggle to keep your SRS alive. If they die, you simply summon more. The only thing that you need to keep alive is yourself, which is why we have a nice big life gain on block shield for our Guardian. This will be a super tanky build. It's probably a bit lower damage from the Necro, but if you're looking for a build that doesn't die and can still do pretty solid bossing, I bet this will feel quite good. If you have any experiences playing SRS, then feel free to comment down below. And if you have no experience with SRS at all, maybe check out Balor Mage, another content creator here on YouTube and over on Twitch TV. I'll have a link to his channel down below. He has recently been playing an SRS build and can share his thoughts as well. And last but certainly not least, Poison Spark. Poison Spark has been a thing ever since Ashes of the Stars was added. And yes, it does require Ashes to fully enable the effect. Phantasmal Spark converts Spark's damage over to Chaos. This means that much like Blade Vortex or a base Chaos skill such as Forbidden Rite, your Spark will easily be able to inflict poisons on enemies. The reason I wanted to talk about this specifically is there's some really cool tech here with the Singularity. You might not think of Singularity as a weapon that's really good for Chaos builds, but you'll notice it says 100% increased damage with hits and ailments. Poison is an ailment, so it's 100% increased damage with poisons against hindered enemies. And if you wanted to do even better on the clear, you could swap to a Beano's Kitchen Knife for Poison Prolif. I very much recommend Beano's, by the way. It always feels great to use, though I'm guessing with Spark you probably don't have to. Furthermore, this is a Trickster. Tricksters are pretty cool. We've got a very interesting selection of talents as we're building around CI to maximize Spellbreaker. We're also leeching, which means there's a pretty significant amount of hit damage going on, and Polymath, which is enabled by hitting all of the notables on the tree. If you want to know more about that, I have an upcoming video about my Shield Crush Trickster, which will explain how Polymath math works. I think it's still probably better to play this on an Occultist, but it's a really cool showcase of what builds can be in Path of Exile, and how thinking out of a box can be good enough even if it's technically not the best, a thing that's very often overlooked. You don't need the best, highest DPS build in PoE. What you need is a build that's able to do all the content, preferably without dying, and preferably in a quick and smooth manner. So if you want to see something that's a little bit more like the traditional Poison Occultist, you have this, where we've got Aegis Aurora, since why wouldn't you want to be functionally immortal? We're a CI build, we are using a Grasping Mail. Yes, it was nerfed, it is still absolutely excellent, especially if you roll it to get increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. This is of course a high budget example, and the whole build is reasonably high budget as well. I really wouldn't want to play it without an Ashes of the Stars, but much like a Phantasmal Cremation Necromancer, if you have the budget to afford it, and you want to make a high-end build that feels really good to play, maybe you're a Spark fan, but you don't want to make your 5th Spark Inquisitor, I'd absolutely recommend doing this. So those are 3 pretty cool builds that I wanted to highlight today. I think all of them are very strong and capable of a diverse range of content. There are of course areas where each will excel at, and each will fall a little bit short, but I don't think any of them are specifically restricted to one type of content. They can all map, they can all kill bosses, and all of them should be uber boss viable if that's what you want to do. It'll probably be really easy to put together SRS on a budget, whereas the HOWA Flicker will cost a little bit more, and the Poison Spark will cost more again. So depending on what you're planning to spend, there's also a pretty good range of budget options as well. Of course, prices are subject to change. If you're watching this in 320, where SRS is the #1 meta build, maybe things are 10 times as expensive. I have no idea what the future holds. I do think that the changes in 3.19 have helped to foster greater build diversity. And I know it can be easy to get caught up in the trap of looking at the fact that a bunch of people are all playing the same thing, and a bunch of people are all recommending the same thing, and thinking, oh, I have to play that too. But that's really not the case, especially once you dive into it a little bit. It's true that it will always be easier to play something that's super popular. However, there's a lot of really good builds that just don't get all that much attention, which, if you look a little bit more closely at how the mechanics interact, are definitely playable and capable of doing all content. That said, if you want to play a meta build, there's no harm either. There's going to be a lot more information, a much bigger market of people to sell gear to and buy gear from, and you should be in for a pretty good time. Since if a couple thousand people are playing a build and having fun, it can't possibly be bad, right? I mean, lightning strikes never got stuck on pebbles and just failed to do any damage at all. Alright, jokes aside, I may not be a very big fan of lightning strike. I think it gets stuck on pebbles too much, but plenty of people enjoy it, and that's kind of a point I'm trying to make here. Overall, 3.19 is a much more diverse league build-wise than 3.18 was, and hopefully 3.20 will be more diverse still. But now I'm curious, what underrated gem of a build have you played recently that you'd like to share? And do you have any thoughts on the builds I talked about? Be sure to leave them down in the comments below. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. Your support helps keep me independent and allows me to turn down things like sketchy mobile game sponsorships. You can do so for as low as $1 a month over on Patreon, or if you want to support me completely for free, then you can join the community by hopping into my Discord, link below. If you want more content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts. It's a place that I use to review games, ramble my way through video essays, and a lot more. Or of course, you can just click the suggested video in the card right now. I hope you learned something today, and maybe I'll see you again sometime soon.